When you have a desire to lead, to develop and deliver a solution to the world that's uniquely your own, it's necessary to reach deep within yourself. And if you're able to do so and find and access and activate your potential and develop a space to operate, you can find yourself moving forward in the center of calmness. Good evening, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you might be in the world, and welcome again to another episode of the Center of Calmness. And today we are super blessed to have Josh Hamilton with us. Welcome, Josh.
Hey, DK, thanks a lot.
Thanks for joining us. How are things in your corner of the world?
They're different at the moment. My corner of the world has changed drastically in the last couple of weeks because I came back from, I was living in Europe for the last year and came back to my home place in New Zealand. So got to do the isolation process back into New Zealand. So you got 2 weeks of, it's funny, 2 weeks of a lot of time with your own thoughts and working on things that you may have put to the side for a bit. So you talk about the center of calmness. It's definitely a time for that at the moment. It's quite interesting.
I'm sure, yeah. Of course, no one wants to have a 14-day forced quarantine, right? But then again, how often do we actually take 14 days and work on ourselves, developing our inner potential, and actually moving forward like that, right? That's actually quite an opportunity.
It's huge. I think one of the biggest things we face is busyness in the world, and we have so many wants, including like goals and including materialistic things and everything. We don't prioritize that little slice of time that actually ends up being a pretty massive leverage for our own development, for our own health, saneness, relationships, everything. It's really important.
Absolutely. And I wonder if we might start, we were talking about your work with entrepreneurs a couple of seconds ago, but I wonder if we might start at the beginning. Where did you begin your journey, and how did you arrive at the understandings of personal development and progress that you have today?
It's a funny one because I started in education. I actually trained to become a physical education and mathematics teacher, and I went straight into a job. So I went from school to university, back to school, and I still remember I read 2 books. I was never a big reader as a young guy. The first one was the book The Secret by, I can't remember the author, but Bob Proctor does a lot of work in it. And I remember reading it, and it was probably later a time on, I'm like, this makes absolutely no sense. I felt like it was the best marketed book that I'd ever seen, that I'd ever read, but none of it really made any sense. The kind of wishingness was there, and it was, as a young guy, it was based a lot on, I wanted a lot of materialistic things, I wanted the fast car and the big boat and the money in the bank account. So when that started, I remember sitting at my teacher's desk in this old mathematics classroom, and for those of you guys who may have gone back to school and felt those feelings, it's quite odd going back to a school that you were not just the high school kid at, but you also became a teacher at. And I had another book called The Winner's Bible by Dr. Kerry Spackman. And it was interesting reading through his stuff and how much of it applied to our strengths, but mainly to our mindset. And at that time, again, I was still very much like, how am I going to get all these things that I want on a teacher's salary? I was kind of, this was my thought pattern as a young guy. I was like, more money means I can have more things. And that really was the first little wedge in what was going to become kind of my own hero's journey later on, because as I started to look at many of the intrinsic drivers that I have, and we do that in all our teams, people look at different personality tests. We have an array of systems that allow us to go, okay, this is your strength, this is your weakness, this is how a team should be formed. And I looked at that, and I remember watching a kid, and this was years on, but I was watching a kid with mathematics. And the thing with maths is nothing's new. It's very simple. It's black and white. It's right or it's wrong. But it doesn't mean something can't be explained in a million different ways. And you have to be, any teachers who is a good teacher has to be extremely good at explaining one thing in a million different ways so you can get the masses to understand it. And I just remember watching this kid just click And he wasn't a great mathematician. He really struggled in maths. But all of a sudden, he just lit up and he just understood it. And I was like, wow, that feels so good to be a part of that. It just felt incredible. I was like, wow, I really love this teaching job. And as I started to do more development myself, I started to realize I call it the telos zone. It's a Greek word for basically your zone of genius. And it's like, how do I experience more of that? I want to be doing that. I want to be in that zone as much as I can, because that's where I'm in my flow. That's where everything really happens for me and where I experience the most joy and fulfillment. So I started to ask myself that question: how do I experience more of this? And then what naturally started to occur is I found a mentor in my life. He came in the form of a book, a guy called Paul Chek, given to me by a friend, and that was the fork in the road for me. It changed everything. And as soon as I learned about him, I'd suffered pretty major back problems as a young guy. And so I took on his stuff as a way to solve my physical problems. And then I started working with people on how to solve their back problems. And then moving on from that, I started working with people on purpose. And one of my very first clients, just an unpaid client, I said, look, do you mind if I help out with some of this stuff? And he was just struggling, and he got to kind of his late 50s, and he couldn't understand why he no longer had a zest for life anymore. He said, he's like, I've worked in my job for 35 years. I've loved it for that amount of time, and suddenly, poof, it's just disappeared. And he really couldn't understand his why anymore. He had no awareness about why he was doing it. And your why changes over time. Like at the start, it's one thing, and then, it moves on. And so I experienced taking a guy through a why discovery. And again, just this, wow, something just happened. And it was just like, this is what I want to do. And I asked that question again. I want to do more of this, and I want to do it now. And opportunities started coming into my life, and it certainly wasn't easy. I mean, starting a business is not easy. There's such beautiful challenges there that make us grow, that force you to grow. And that was one of the reasons I ended up working with entrepreneurs, because to be an entrepreneur, you have to have an open mind. And as soon as you've got an open mind, you're 90% of your way there. Because when you're working with somebody with an open mind, it's like working with Play-Doh. It's so easy. It's so malleable. You can look at things from a different angle, and you can just change an entire mindset in an instant, which can make somebody break through barriers that are in their business, in their relationships. I find that relationships are always number one. You break through a relationship, suddenly somebody's business grows, or their team develops a new level of performance, or they get that career progression that they really wanted. And that's what really took me there. And then I was invited to do some coaching at a bank in New Zealand. And it was very, at the time, out of my zone, very much outside my comfort zone. I was still early days. I was teaching a bit of mindfulness and doing my coaching on the side. And they said, can you come and do this? And I went, yeah, let's fill those shoes. So I made a program and went and taught a big workshop for them. And it was at that time, it was definitely the proudest day of my life, because I had done something that I absolutely loved and could see the effects immediately in people's lives. And I was like, that's it. I'm doing this forever. This is what I'm doing. So yeah, that's been really my journey. And that was kind of about 5 years ago now, maybe even 6.
That's huge. And that brings up a couple of questions just as you went through. And that was a beautiful story just as it is, without adding anything further. But I did want to ask you, you mentioned the hero's journey, and I wonder, perhaps not all in the audience have heard of this, and I wonder if you might just expand on that a little bit. And then the other question I wanted to ask, how did that opportunity to work with the bank first, how did you attract that opportunity? I think folks would be very interested to know kind of a few of the particulars.
Awesome. Yeah, well, the hero's journey was developed by a guy called Joseph Campbell. And how I've really understood it is there's not many recipes in life, and there's not many recipes to the mind in a lot of ways. But for me, it was really like, this is how your life works in a way, and this is how it's going to affect your mindset. And everybody has, well, a lot of people have that thing where they want to do something. They want to ask a question. It might be a raise. It might be to ask that girl or that guy out. It might be like, I've had this idea rattling around in my brain for years, and I want to take that step. And that is what Joseph Campbell calls, the call. It's somebody knocking at your door going, hey, there's this idea here. Like, do you want to take it or not? And there's this great story by Michael Jackson, I think it was. He rings his songwriter up early in the morning. It's like 4 a.m. or something in the morning. He goes, I've got this idea. He's like, what are you doing calling me? He's like, I got this inspiration, man. I got this idea. He's like, can we talk about it tomorrow? He's like, no, man, because if we don't do it, Prince will, So it's this idea that inspiration comes, and if you don't answer the call, hey, it'll just go somewhere else. And I guarantee the people listening have probably had an idea and then thought about it for years and then gone, oh my gosh, there's my idea. Like they see an ad on the internet and they go, I thought of that. I came up with that. And it's the same in all our lives. But what happens is that call to adventure is scary. And I think for the biggest people, it's hardest for the people who are considered the biggest people in terms of the CEOs in life. I have a really great friend that I'm super proud to, call him my friend, and he built an incredible business, CEO, everything, and you suddenly have so many things attached to you, especially from outside you. Everybody attaches success to you when you own a big company or you have a flash car or a big house or whatever it is. Suddenly you're this person to look up to, and so you have to wear that all this time. You carry it with you. And what happens when you start to answer that call is you really go into your heart and you start to feel this pull. And so often, 99.9% of the time, it's not in the direction that you've built up. It's not in the place that you've spent all your life dreaming of and working towards. And you have to unshackle so many things. It takes so much personal development and so much strength and courage to go in that direction. And once you hear that call, the greatest thing that you can do is really look for a mentor. And you see it in all the movies, like The Matrix, Neo has Morpheus, Lord of the Rings, Frodo has Gandalf. And, we have to go through that process. And when we unshackle, it's a dying of a part of us that gets, it might be the suit of the CEO has to be thrown off, and that part of us has to die in order for us to come back into what they call, into the unknown world and then back into the known world. So that's really the journey there.
Interesting. Okay. And I like the metaphor used of unshackling. And I've also heard of the metaphor of like an insect, right, which can only see in one plane, right? And they're actually missing two other dimensions of their entire existence. And it's a lot like that for us, right? Where once you hear that call is not coming from where you're at, it's coming from where you're going, which is in a totally different place in most cases, right? And you almost have to have a mentorship and support to learn the language of what that's even like.
Yeah, and coming from New Zealand, we have a huge mental health problem in terms of, and men, like male suicide is really, really high in New Zealand. And one of the hardest things, is asking somebody help me. I've got this thing. I know I want to change, but I have no idea what that looks like. I have no idea where I'm going, and I really need some help. But that takes a huge amount of courage. And in a world where I live in, from New Zealand, you don't cry as a man. You don't share those pains. It's not a normal thing to do. And it does. There's tears. There's heartbreak. There's everything in that journey as an entrepreneur or any kind of change that you want in your life. There is pain.
Definitely. Yeah, I've experienced that myself. And in many cases, when you run into those social mores, right, where it's just simply not acceptable or often misinterpreted what's actually going on, it's a little bit embarrassing. But it's a very necessary rite of passage, if we will, right?
Yeah, exactly. And
so, if I could just really go ahead, please.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. I also wanted just to maybe highlight that moment of transition for you when you went from the personal coaching and more of the physical coaching to mindset, and then you actually landed that opportunity to speak at the bank. I mean, can you take us through that moment and not so much the specifics or details, but how did it feel to go through that transition?
Yeah, and that's such a pertinent point, because it takes me back to that book, The Secret, and how much was kind of left out, because I I always felt embarrassed by the term manifesting. People think, you're some guy, with a ponytail sitting on a couch somewhere visualizing your future, and everything's just coming and pouring into your bank account, cars in your garage, you've got all this stuff going on. And where's the real stuff? And the real stuff is in the suffering. And in the suffering, because you have to suffer when you go on that adventure, that's where joy is, but that's where grace is. That's where true manifestation is. When you start to accept that call, it's so funny. You take that first step, and there's always something there to meet you. And for me, that's manifestation, because there's no promise. In fact, there's probably one promise, that it is going to be hard. It's going to be challenges. That's probably the only promise you're going to have. It's mysterious. You have no idea. But if you keep stepping, you get that chance to really actually manifest what it is that you want. And so often with that comes joy. There's suffering, equal suffering on the other side, but you can't have one without the other. And so the bank thing came from, I had started to do this work, and I'd started to talk about it because I was passionate about it. I was like, wow, I'd started to do physical stuff, and I talked a little bit about the mindfulness, and I was doing my master's at the time. And a lady who was teaching the master's reached out to me and said, Josh, do you know anybody who does mindfulness? Because I'm now working at this bank and they need somebody. And I said, no, I don't really know anybody. And she just said, she gave me a second chance. She said, how about you? And I just remember, it's like having a size 13 shoe, but your feet are only size 9. And you're just like, right, am I going to take this chance to say, right, I'll fill these shoes and I'll do this? And so I did. And man, it was scary. I had no idea what I was stepping into. It was the first time in the corporate world, and I didn't know what was I presenting. I didn't know how to charge. I didn't know anything. And it was so comical, DK, because I finished that workshop, and I remember asking, before the whole thing, I have an older sister, and she had worked in governmental roles and things like this. And I said, what do I charge? Like, how do I charge for this? And I'd worked in luxury yacht industries, and I kind of knew about that, but that was a whole nother kind of tier. So I was like, oh my gosh. So I kind of worked out this formula to charge, and the VP pulled me aside at the end of the day. He said, Josh, can I have a word, please? And I went, oh God, what have I done? And he said, I want to talk to you about your invoice. I said, oh God, okay. He said, look, it's not really aligned with us to pay such a little amount for such high value. And that was the biggest compliment I could have ever asked. I left that place and I went, that's huge. Fantastic. Perfect. Thank you very much. Yeah. So that was that journey, really.
That is excellent, right? And you speak of the seeker, right? The law of attraction, and here you've really personified that in a couple of different ways, right? Where you're not jumping up, and folks say that if you don't jump enthusiastically, often you lose it. But in fact, if you've attracted something, an opportunity to yourself, it'll give you a moment to really metabolize what's going on, and then to come in undercharging and to get that kind of feedback. That's awesome. So
it was a good time.
If I could ask, how did that expand? Did you, before you moved on to work with entrepreneurs, did you have a large corporate practice for a while?
No, so I never went and made a big corporate business or anything like that. I've always stayed aligned to that one thing that I found out, that just I want to help people find out what it is that really lights them up, and then how do they create from that place. So from then on, I just went straight into the individual stuff and started doing some group work, started doing a lot more development myself, and then really experiencing what it was, well, finding out really what people really wanted, and then started working there. A little bit, obviously, well, quite a lot, is picking who do you want to work with. That's a big part of starting a business. And so I just chose, I was like, right, I want to work with this type of person who's having these kind of problems. And off I went.
That's awesome. And if I may ask, who is that person, and what problems do you focus on most vividly? I'm sure you cover a variety of different scenarios, but what would be your number one client and their number one issue that really resonates the most with you?
So there's two types. So one is the person who is already in that corporate space, who enjoys their work, like, or is like, okay, I'm happy where I am, but why can't I get to the next level? It seems like everybody else around me who I thought I had more skill than, or more strategies, or a better relationship system with, they seem to be advancing faster than me. Why am I not getting the career progression that I want? And then the other person has very similar problems, and that is the same as an entrepreneur who started a business, and they're kind of ticking along. It's just that survival aspect. They kind of like, I love what I do, but I'm starting to hate it because it's really costing me so much time in my life. Do I just go back to the safety net of a normal job where I get paid every week, or do I take this further and really step up? And the two of the same problems when it comes to a lot of things. Often they're asking the question, who am I to go for a VP role or lead a team in my business? Who am I to start my own career? Who am I to speak on stage? Who am I to help anybody else in this situation? And it so often comes down to that one aspect of, who aren't you to do that? Who aren't you to step into the greatest version of yourself and go for it? Like, people often
Right.
use the word like, oh, I haven't earned it, I don't deserve it, or do I deserve it? And I'm like, it's neither of those. You don't deserve it. You're never going to deserve it. You're never going to earn it. You've only got to allow it. And the allowing comes from allowing yourself. Like, are you going to allow yourself to go for that, to experience that level of success, to experience that energy, that health, that income, that relationship? And it's a crazy old world for something so complicated as those situations are to be so simple and come down to really a level of self-love, of thinking, gosh, am I really worth it to answer this call? Am I really worth it to be paid that much? Am I really worth it to run such a high-performing team? And it is there. And yes, there's strategies in business for sure, but in the end, there's really six pillars to it. And there's kind of mindset and sales at the start, and you can create an amazing business from mindset and sales. The rest of it, everybody kind of knows. Like, you need teams, you need finance, you need capital. Those are all systems that have existed forever. They're strategies, but mindset will always be the 80. It'll be the 20% that gives you 80% of your results. And if you don't have that right, as they say, you're never going to create a new level from the same mindset that you've got now. You've got to change your mindset until you can reach another level. There's no two ways about it. And in that, you experience the beautiful thing of suffering and the equal amount of joy on the path.
Yeah, absolutely. Couple of key points right there. You mentioned the point of pain, right, which is true both for corporate, which may seem like a safe environment, but I have not found it so whatsoever. It's as competitive as the real world, sometimes even worse, right? And then you have the entrepreneur trying to stake their claim, right, out in perhaps what appears to be a completely green field of nothingness, right, or just a grassy plain with nothing built. But either way, it's a point of pain, right? And I really like the approach that you're offering here, where we're asking the wrong question. We're asking if we're worth it, but really that has nothing to do with it. It has everything to do with, as you put it, allowing oneself to reach for that goal and just simply go for it.
Yeah.
That's huge. That's huge. I wonder if, as we close, you might have and you can make it an actual client example or an anonymous example if you prefer to keep certain details private. But I wonder if you might have an example of a particular client or group that really crushed it after going through a process or a system that you took them through, and how you shifted them through some of these stages and helped them move forward.
Cool. Yeah, I have a few favorite clients. I guess you end up with working with people so closely that you get really connected to people. It's hard to not have everybody as your favorite. But there was this one girl, and she was really just starting off a journey in the health sector, building a business, and she just couldn't see what it was. She didn't understand why she wasn't taking the steps that she knew were necessary. As again, she knew the strategy, she knew the tactics. She just couldn't understand why she wasn't going to take them, why she wasn't doing them, what was going on for her. And she didn't understand some of the kind of universal principles sitting behind it. But after we did 7 months together, I think, she tripled her income. Like, it was incredible to just watch. And that, because coaching is such a sort of objective thing, you're not really looking at points of change all the time, but some things will happen. And for every one of my clients, yes, income has increased, and that's great. But the people I work with, it's never really the number one. They're like, look, income's not really my thing right now. I really want to do this. I want to build this business. I want it to be successful. And yes, I want to make money from it, but I know there's just so many issues going on. And she just came out. Her relationship went through the roof. She ended up, well, she was getting married. Unfortunately, some coronavirus things happened. And then she got, her business tripled. And it was just, it's so wonderful to be a part of that journey for someone. It really is something special. And I think one of my other clients who I still get to work with, who's amazing, and he's built a massive business, but can't seem to get the presence that he wants with his partner and his kids. And it's just the mindset that he's running that is not allowing him to have that time, that center of calmness that you so profoundly put as a title, just not being able to find that. And when you ask any top performer, what is it? What are the moments that truly make you happy? And I was working in the billion-dollar industry of the yachts when I was younger, and I remember watching as one of the wealthiest men in Europe came over to me and he said, "Josh, please, can you teach my daughter how to wakeboard?" And I said, "Of course, boss. I can absolutely do that." And I remember teaching her how to wakeboard, and I drove the boat past the back of the super yacht, and he was just on his phone. He didn't have any time. And he just missed these moments. And you talk to people in these successful positions, and they say, "What are your favorite moments?" And they talk about their kid who comes in at 5 a.m. in the morning and jumps under the covers and gives them that hug. They talk about that time where they just sat and shared a glass of wine with their partner, and they just talked about what was happening in their lives. No one have I ever heard say, "Oh, it's when I'm driving my Ferrari down the highway. It's when I'm sitting on my yacht sipping on champagne." It's never anything to do with that. And people, yes, want money. It gives us freedom of choice. It does. But when you get down to the nitty-gritty of what somebody really wants in their life, it's profoundly magical, but at the same time, profoundly scary realization for, that armor that we talked about, de-shackling, what we've put on ourselves and having to experience in order to get it. It's sad. It really is sad.
Yeah, but so profound, right? And that makes the work you're doing so valuable, right? Because it frees them, as I see it, it frees them to both find their center of calmness, achieve more than they ever achieved before, and then they have more time to enjoy those relationships, build and develop. That's huge. I'm very touched by that. I'm glad you shared that. That's awesome.
Oh,
and with that in mind, I wanted to share some contact information for you in case folks in the audience might wish to reach out after this. So I've got your email address here. Unfortunately, I didn't capitalize your last name. I apologize for that, but it's josh.hamilton, common spelling, Hamilton, at bodyiq.fit. So representing your origin point, right, in fitness and back solutions for your back, and now with solutions for the backbone of your life, which is even more profound.
Yeah, it is.
That's awesome.
It is.
Let me put that for the audience in just for the audio one more time. It's josh.hamilton at bodyiq.fit. All right. And Josh, it's been such a pleasure and an honor to have you on our broadcast this evening.
Oh, thank you, DK. Thank you so much for the time, and thanks for spreading this message. It's a needed one. It's appreciated.
All right. Thanks. And of course, we will endeavor to continue spreading it for as long as the world needs it, and I think it'll need it for quite some time.
Yeah. Oh, much love.
Likewise. And for the Center of Calmness, I'm DK Warner.